Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about business analysis from idea to stories and tests and how AI can help here. And for that purpose, let's just get acquainted with the typical business analysis workflow. From business request to continuous improvement following best agile and safe methodologies, we have different stages, right? But those stages have different work types, right? Like something you do in a meeting, something you do personally when you try to get through what you just talked about during the meeting. And for each stage, right, there are AI scopes where AI can help, right? Like at each stage, and it's highlighted here. Basically, today we focus on one of those areas where at some point, we are ready to define the epic and get it broken down into the user stories and get test suite generated. This will happen using AI transforming epics into the comprehensive stories with test case coverage. But let's see it in action. So for that demo purpose, we just took one of existing web applications, which is actually a credit calculator, right? And there are different credit calculators. It's like a Romanian bank, and there are different options: a personal credit calculator or mortgage credit calculator, right? And we just, for demo purposes, we prepared an agent which decomposed, actually researched this calculator existing functionality using Playwright browser, and then prepared for us a bunch of epics for our demo workflow. Here is our starting point. Usually an epic, look at what we have. Basic description with rough ideas, no structured acceptance criteria. There might be a meeting transcripts or meeting notes somewhere there, right? Q&A session notes. There might be some draft of the requirement at some point, right? Answering your question, but it's all unstructured, and eventually we need to draft an epic and make it consistent, do the analysis and check the questions we have, and etc. etc. So now watch, I'm moving this into the analysis, right? And the Jira automation triggered our epic intake agent, and it's now retrieving the details, analyzing gaps, and preparing the context. While we are talking, right, what happens with our board? You see, this epic is actually got acquainted by Alita. So, literally, right, your AI teammate got the ownership, and it is now assigned to Alita bot. Let me explain overall concept here. So, how does it work, right? There are different event triggers in Jira and in any other system, right? In GitHub, there are events for pull requests and issue creation or comments addition or movement throughout the board. In Azure DevOps, same, right? But eventually there is an automation rule which reacts on some event type. It might be a comment, right? Which contains a name of your AI team member, right? AI teammate. But that event triggers a webhook or an API request which goes to Elitea, and AI agent uses that is initiated for that ticket, and that ticket is used as a context, and conversation history, right, to process your request. Let's have a look in Jira. So there is a native feature, right, Jira automation, where you can have multiple rules set for different actions. Let's have a look at one of them, right? So there is a workflow which is triggered by this epic transition from one status to another, and there is also a check after that it's actually an epic, and etc., right? That might also work for user story, right? So when something is when a ticket is transitioned to new state and it is a story, then we trigger that workflow. But that's not limited only to the items transition. There are different triggers. Some of them may act, for example, this one may act as a trigger when a story is reaching some particular state, then we check for parent and then switch to parent workflow, where we see if under the particular feature all stories reach the same status, or actually done, or closed or ready for development, and then we trigger the epic level workflow to proceed with the end-to-end test suite generation. Or for example, another case, right, when a comment is created, and that comment is addressed to a particular teammate. For example, your AI teammate. In our case, it's Alita bot account. So that's how it works. What's important here, right? So if you think about all this epic to test suite generation, right? There are different stages from epic intake, right? Like we dragged the story into the analysis, right? We do have questions, right? We validate it against some checklists, and we do need to draft it and make it a little bit more detailed, right? And then we need to decompose it into the stories, and each story need to be reviewed and approved, and then detailed specification need to be prepared for that, and then test cases generated. And all that story works and is driven by event architecture, right? Something happens and that triggers a dedicated agent which does the job, and there is of course a human in the loop which assists and like decide and clarify, but ultimately the job is done by your AI teammate. What's important here, right? That while we were talking, AI agent actually got that epics through Jira, right? Like reviewed the comment, like reviewed anything attached to it, or for example linked to it, right? Went to the Confluence and then read everything and work on the ticket, right? So eventually it replies here, but I actually don't need to get here, right? Because Alita here serves as a backend for agent, and whole my story is actually I'm not leaving the system I'm comfortable with, right? I got used to working in Jira. I work in Jira, and my AI teammate assists me. And you remember we had like a draft epic, but now you see it's much more detailed, right? With some details, with detailed acceptance criteria, and properly linked artifacts. And AI agent actually prepared the comment, right? Review results, saying okay, it's more or less well prepared and ready to move to the next stage. And once I'm comfortable, right, I just move it to the next stage, and another event happens. Let me explain how it works, right? So there are couple of agents, so they act as a specialist in particular area, and each of that agent is dedicated for a particular stage, right? So eventually we get to the point where we have all the stories written, and once we review and approve them, they are like and clarify some points, right? They are detailed, and then for those detailed user stories, test cases are created. And once all stories reach some particular stage, we do care about end-to-end coverage on epic level. So out of those done stories, right, like ready for development stories, we create an end-to-end suite on epic level to maintain traceability and coverage on end-to-end integration scenarios. Let's see the results in Jira. From small description, we're getting to well-defined epics, right? Like this, which looks pretty cool. Right after that, we're like documenting something, right? And then here it is, right? Epic specification is complete, and I mean here is the summary. But ultimately, I don't want to work it like make it work here. I better work in my dashboard, right? And what it means on my dashboard, this epic went to this next stage, right, which is spec ready, which says okay, the story is detailed, and there is a epic specification on Confluence which contains much more details, and there is also a user story template, right? You see, here is the specification on Confluence for this particular epic, which couple of details, which is well formatted, which serves as a source of documentation. Now what we need to do, right, we need to move this epic to stories draft, and that's where another trigger happens, which should break down the user stories, the epic into the user stories. Epic is a source of truth for this agent. It's my AI teammate. It reviews the epic, it reviews the linked pages, gets in details from Jira, gets in some comments, and eventually creating user stories for functionality which we intended to work on. Yeah, you see, it's gonna create 5 user stories one by one using native Jira format. Meanwhile, agent actually acts as a as my AI teammate, right? It handles my feedback. It can answer me right here in comments, right? And it summarizes what it did, right? It's like it's saying, okay, here is the step where epic specification was completed, right? And here is what I did, right? Like pretty intensive stuff. And then it transitions the status and assigns back to me, right? Tagging me, saying, okay, your turn to review it. And while we were talking, you see there were a couple of stories created. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 stories were created. And agent says, okay, here is the epic decomposition completed. Here are the user stories created. Here is my details, why I did it like that, right? Mentions the traceability, right? And says, okay, ready for review. And that's where we get to the point where we need to work on the stories. Basically, I just walk through them, approve some of them, then we get to the point where we approve all the remaining ones. This one is approved, another one is approved, approve all the remaining ones. Now we see one of those stories go to this spec complete state where agent finish the decomposition of the story into, like, finish documenting that story, right, on the Confluence. With much more details, right, with some additional technical specification, right, and one by one our stories get into this like throughout the draft to approved when human in the loop approves them, then spec complete when they are detailed, and then to the test ready state. And once they all reach test ready state, right, which means test cases creation just got finished, and we can see user story defined and test cases linked to that user story, right? And agent responded that those test cases were created. I mean, just me dragging throughout the life cycle, but eventually we have these test cases. So now it's time to move them ready for development. Once I review each user story, right, I see that all of them have test cases. Some of them may be not relevant. I can unlink them or rewrite them, but ultimately each user story is fully specified. I start dragging it to the next status, ready for development, one by one, right, saying, okay, those stories are ready for development. And once last story reaches that ready for development state, a workflow is triggered, like epic level, the end-to-end test case suite builder. We'll see that later, but meanwhile, once those stories are ready for development, I can get to the actual execution. Let's get some test case from one of the user stories executed. I mean, pretty good test case. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna do that through the GitHub Copilot on my Visual Studio, and I have GitHub Copilot test executor agent configured with access to Zephyr through my Elitea instance, and it also has access to Playwright browser, which will allow it to execute the test case naturally. And it also has some skills, right? Like it can run cleanup script and then run the script to prepare a report. So we'll see that. As you can see, agent got this test case from Zephyr, got those steps from Zephyr, and now it starts executing those test cases immediately in browser. As you can see, agent just executed this test case, taking the screenshots for me and saying, okay, here is the step which passed, here is the step which passed. Moreover, I can go to this user story, right, where we created this test case, and observe test execution out there, right? Like, let's get back to this story. Let's see the test case we just executed and observe the status of the test case. You see, there was a test case and there is a test execution completed right, today. So the execution is recorded, automated execution. Just to recap, right, we just saw how ecosystem of agents with seamless integration with your infrastructure, Jira, Confluence, Zephyr, with integration with agent swarm, prepared for us detailed epic, broken down that into the user stories, created test cases, right? And eventually it even created a comprehensive end-to-end test suite. As long as my user stories moved to the ready for development, there was an agent with which reports, okay, end-to-end test suite is created on an epic level. If we switch on this Zephyr, right, there are a couple of end-to-end test cases prepared, right, out of the stories, and now we ensure end-to-end testing of currency selection fork flow. Thanks for watching.